In a world where brilliance often hides behind uniforms society overlooks, one quiet janitor carried a secret that no one expected. Day after day, he swept floors and emptied trash cans in a towering corporate skyscraper, while the suits around him never once thought to ask what stories lived behind his eyes. They saw only his skin, his uniform, his role. But beneath those work-worn hands was a mind sharper than the executives earning millions above him. And one fateful afternoon, in a crowded boardroom filled with billionaires and innovators, when the air grew heavy with silence and confusion, it was this very janitor who stepped forward. What happened next didn't just silence the room. It shattered prejudices, rewrote destinies, and proved a single truth. Greatness can come from the most unexpected places. The skyscraper towered high above the city skyline, its glass walls shimmering with power and prestige. Inside, polished marble floors echoed with the footsteps of wealthy executives and ambitious employees rushing to prove themselves. To outsiders, this place was the beating heart of progress and innovation. But behind the shine, there were stories, hidden in plain sight. Stories ignored by those who only looked at titles, paychecks, and tailored suits. Among the countless workers who passed through the revolving doors each morning was a man most never noticed. He wore no tie, no luxury watch, no name etched on a golden plaque. Instead, he carried a mop, a broom, and a quiet dignity that often went unseen. His name was Samuel. To some, he was simply the janitor, the man who cleaned the offices, late into the night. But Samuel carried within him a brilliance most could not imagine. Every night after finishing his shifts, while the city slept, he buried himself in old textbooks rescued from libraries and discarded college students. Mathematics, physics, engineering. He devoured them all with relentless hunger. He scribbled notes on scraps of paper, solved equations on napkins, and taught himself concepts that even seasoned scholars struggled to master. Yet in the skyscraper where he worked, no one knew. Executives brushed past him without a glance, treating him as invisible. To them, Samuel was only a worker paid to keep the building spotless. But the truth was, Samuel understood more about structures, machines, and innovation than many of the so-called experts sitting in the top-floor boardrooms, and soon, fate would place him in the very room where his voice could no longer be ignored. The morning sun spilled into the glass-walled skyscraper, painting streaks of gold across its polished halls. Executives hurried through with clipped steps, their eyes glued to tablets and phones, their suits crisp, their voices laced with authority. It was another ordinary day at the headquarters of one of the world's most powerful corporations. But for Samuel, it was just another day where he was invisible. He moved silently through the hallways with his cleaning cart, careful not to get in the way. He was used to the stairs, or rather, the lack of them. No one looked at him directly. To them, he was just part of the background, like the furniture or the walls. Yet behind his calm, collected expression, Samuel carried an entire universe of knowledge. The world only saw a janitor, but Samuel had spent years studying. In the quiet hours of the night, he immersed himself in books about advanced physics, fluid dynamics, and engineering principles. His passion wasn't born from wealth or opportunity, but from sheer determination. Every formula he solved on scraps of discarded paper, every late-night breakthrough under dim light bulbs, built him into something extraordinary. But in this place, his brilliance was not just ignored, it was dismissed. Once he had tried to strike up a conversation with a group of junior engineers, sharing an idea he thought might improve a design he had overheard them discussing. They chuckled politely at first, then exchanged glances and laughed. "Thanks, but we've got it handled," one of them muttered. The subtext was clear. How could a black janitor know more than a trained engineer? From that day on, Samuel stayed silent, yet fate has a way of pushing the silent into the spotlight. On this particular day, the company was buzzing with tension. The boardroom was filled with some of the brightest minds in the industry, gathered around a massive whiteboard covered in formulas and sketches. At the center of it all was a problem no one could seem to solve. A new project, critical to the company's future, was at risk of failure. Billions of dollars hung in the balance, The executives, dressed in their immaculate suits, debated fiercely, their voices growing louder with each passing moment. Samuel, tasked with tidying up the boardroom after meetings, had walked in quietly, his cart parked by the corner. He moved like he always did, unnoticed. But as his eyes scanned the whiteboard, something clicked. He saw the flaw instantly. The equations were impressive, yes, but incomplete. The diagrams detailed, but missing. One crucial adjustment. To Samuel, the answer was clear, shining like a beacon among scribbled lines of confusion. For a moment he stood frozen, mop in hand, his heart pounding. He had been here before, holding knowledge that others didn't see, holding answers no one thought he could possibly know. He remembered the laughs, the dismissive glances, the way his words were brushed aside. But this time, something was different. This wasn't just about an idea. This was about a project that could change the company's future. The executives continued their heated debate, frustration dripping from every word. Papers shuffled, pens tapped, voices rose. And yet the solution stared back at Samuel from the board, waiting to be spoken. His chest tightened with both fear and conviction. He knew that if he spoke up, he risked mockery, dismissal, maybe even anger. But if he stayed silent, he would be betraying the knowledge he had worked so hard to earn. It was in that moment of silence, with the weight of invisibility pressing down on him, that Samuel decided something had to change. He couldn't remain a shadow forever. He couldn't let prejudice silence truth. So when the billionaire CEO walked into the room demanding answers, Samuel knew that his moment had come. The boardroom fell into a tense silence as the billionaire CEO strode in. His presence was magnetic, commanding the attention of every executive in the room. He scanned their worried faces, his sharp eyes narrowing at the whiteboard filled with half-solutions and unanswered questions. Billions were on the line, and not a single one of his top minds had the answer. "Where is the breakthrough?" His voice boomed, heavy with authority. The engineers shifted uncomfortably. Some looked down at their notes, others avoided eye contact altogether. No one had an answer. The weight of failure loomed in the air like a storm cloud ready to burst. And then, it happened. From the corner of the room, a voice, steady, low, and unexpected, cut through the silence. "I know the answer." Every head snapped toward the source. There stood Samuel, still holding his mop, his uniform smudged from hours of cleaning. For a heartbeat, the room froze. Then came the scoffs. A few executives exchanged incredulous glances. One even chuckled under his breath, unable to contain the disbelief. A janitor, claiming to know what the finest engineers in the company could, not. But Samuel did not flinch. His eyes, calm yet unyielding, stayed fixed on the whiteboard. He repeated firmer this time. "I know the answer." The CEO raised an eyebrow. Unlike his team, he didn't laugh. He had built his empire by spotting potential where others saw none. His curiosity was piqued. With a measured gesture, he stepped aside and said, "Show me." Samuel's heart pounded in his chest as he set the mop aside and walked to the board. The executives shifted uncomfortably, some whispering under their breath, their skepticism dripping with disdain. He could feel every eye burning into him, waiting for him to fail. But as he picked up a marker, his hands didn't tremble. His years of study, his endless nights of hunger for knowledge, all converged into this single moment. With confident strokes, he corrected their equations, erased their missteps, and redrew their model. At first, the room was filled with smirks, but slowly, as the lines took shape, the whispers stopped. Eyes widened, frowns turned to stunned silence. What Samuel was unveiling wasn't guesswork, it was genius. By the time he placed the marker down, the board told a different story. A complete solution, elegant in its simplicity yet powerful enough to solve the very problem that had stumped the entire team. The CEO stepped forward, studying Samuel's work with a keen eye. Minutes passed, the room holding its collective breath. And then, with a slow nod, The billionaire turned back to his stunned executives and declared, "He's right." Gasps echoed. Some executives slumped back in their chairs, humiliated. Others simply stared at Samuel, their disbelief giving way to awe. In that instant, the janitor they had overlooked, dismissed, and laughed at was no longer invisible. He was the man who had solved what no one else could. The room remained frozen in silence, the weight of what had just unfolded pressing on every soul present. Samuel stood still, his chest rising and falling with the rhythm of his racing heart. For years, he had been unseen, treated as though his only worth was pushing a mop, scrubbing floors, and blending into the background. Yet in this single moment, his truth could no longer be ignored. The CEO turned back to Samuel, his gaze sharper than ever, not with judgment, but with something else entirely: respect. That single word, respect, was something Samuel had been denied countless times. But now, it radiated in the way the CEO extended his hand, offering it not as a formality, but as a recognition of Samuel's brilliance. The executives shifted uneasily. Many of them had dismissed him outright. Some had mocked him openly, yet none could deny the truth now staring them in the face. Their multi-million-dollar problem had been solved, not by the people society considered the smartest in the room, but by the man they had treated as invisible. But the story didn't end with shock. No, it was only the beginning of something far greater. The CEO, recognizing the depth of Samuel's talent, insisted on hearing his story, and as Samuel shared his journey, nights spent cleaning offices while secretly reading textbooks he salvaged from bins, days filled with menial labor while his mind burned with theories and formulas. The room began to see him for who he truly was, not just a janitor but a scholar, a thinker, and above all a man who refused to let society's prejudice define his destiny. Word spread quickly. Within weeks, Samuel was no longer working in the shadows. He was seated at the table, not as a janitor but as a consultant, guiding projects, solving problems, and proving day after day that intellect knows no color, no class, and no uniform. For Samuel, it was vindication, yet it was also bittersweet, because while his rise was extraordinary, it also exposed the harsh truth. How many other Samuels had been ignored, laughed at, or left behind simply because of the way they looked, or the uniform they wore? The CEO himself admitted it publicly. "I almost overlooked the smartest man in this building, not because of his mind, but because of his role, and that is a mistake I will never make again." That statement sent ripples far beyond the company's walls. It sparked conversations about opportunity, about hidden talent, and about the ways society often silences voices before they can even be heard. But for Samuel, the greatest victory wasn't the job title, the recognition, or the wealth that eventually followed. It was the validation that his fight, his long, quiet fight against invisibility, had been worth it. His story became a beacon, proof that brilliance can emerge from anywhere and that greatness often wears disguises that the world refuses to see. And so, as the world applauded, Samuel remained humble. Each time he looked back on that boardroom, he remembered not just the moment he was seen, but the years he endured being unseen. His victory was not his alone. It belonged to every overlooked soul, every silenced dream, every unseen genius waiting in the shadows. Because in the end, this was never just a story about a janitor solving an equation. It was a story about breaking chains, defying prejudice, and reminding the world that human worth cannot be measured by uniforms, titles, or social labels. So let me ask you this. How many brilliant minds are we still ignoring today? How many Samuels walk past us daily, their potential hidden under the weight of stereotypes? And how long will it take before we start looking, truly looking, beyond the surface? Because sometimes the one who holds the answer isn't seated at the head of the table. Sometimes he's the one cleaning it.